Greetings, everyone. Welcome to Pianist Academy. I'm Szczepanek. Good to see so many of you here this morning for me. Kale, welcome. Antonio, welcome. Rob. Jill Zorro, welcome. Jill Zorro. Bedlington Groomer. David, Whitney, Nathaniel. C Drive. Hey, C Drive. All right. So, if you read the description before you joined, and hello, Nancy. We're actually going to start with something slightly different than Bethany's piece. We're going to, so Bethany, hang on. Alex, hello. And that's actually the reason why I just played that little snippet in the opening of today's session. You all listened very closely, right? I'm assuming. Antonio actually asked a question about that pianist who I had never heard of before. Have any of you? Yes, C-Drive, and now for something completely different. Ervin Nyiregyhazi. Any of you heard of him? We'll do maybe a little experiment, something a little different. Antonio asked a little bit of my opinions about his playing, but I would also like to open that up to everybody who's here. June, hello. So, if you didn't catch the little opening snippet, or if you'd like to hear some of it again, maybe I'll play another minute of it, and then we can all discuss. Antonio, why are you drawn to Ervin's playing? By the way, Ervin lived during the 20th century, from about 1900 to the mid-80s. So, fairly, I guess he overlapped very considerably with what we would typically consider the golden age of interpreters of piano, Arthur Rubinstein, Horowitz, etc. Antonio, yeah, let us know what you think. I'm going to play a little bit of that snippet again, and let's have just a discussion. What do you think of the example? The only one I have available to play right now, he didn't actually record all that much stuff, but the only one I have available is that snippet from Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody, the third one. It's not nearly as famous as the second one. Antonio, you say you find his interpretations riveting, fresh, and that they move you. Okay, let me play some of that again. And we'll just have kind of a let's react to Ervin's playing. Okay, let me see. There it is. Okay, I'll play a little bit of it again, and I won't show the countdown on screen again because we're already started. But we'll just hear the audio for a bit. Okay. Okay, that's good. I wanted to get through the powerful section there. To answer Alan's question, this is Liszt's, some of Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody number 3, played by Ervin Nyiregyhazi. I always have to double take to say his last name correctly. And I was just asking for people's thoughts on his style, his interpretation, his performance. I don't believe there are any videos of him. Antonio, you could answer this question better. But I couldn't find, I did a cursory search, but I couldn't find any videos of him playing, and I believe he only recorded a couple albums. Hungarian pianist, by the way. I don't think I mentioned that. If you didn't get that by his last name. Okay. Antonio, you say his years of pilgrimage are very special. I did listen to Verley Doberman. I'm going to reserve my thoughts until other people have a chance to share. Jess, good morning. And Antonio, you have a quote from him. He said, quote, "Other pianists play the right notes the wrong way. I play the wrong notes the right way." And Bethany, you say, huge contrast between the light and the dark moods, not just in the composition, but in how he plays it. True. Lots of expression, says Nathaniel. Gelzoro, I love how lyrical the playing from that generation was. Gelzoro, I think we can go further and say that his playing was far even more, we could call it lyrical, sure, than others from the same time. David, lyrical and dramatic. Hello, Catherine. And Rob, you said that last section was probably the heaviest and slowest. You've heard that. Yeah. Yeah, you know, I think the more you have an opportunity to listen to pianists from that era, especially if you can find good recordings, and sometimes things like the piano roll recordings that we have available, sometimes from composers themselves, if they're very, very early 20th century, sometimes those can be great. There's always a little bit of a question if this was not a piano roll recording, by the way. This was from an actual LP. So it wasn't a piano roll that was being re-replicated on another piano and then recorded again. Sometimes when we have those types of recordings, we have to question some of the tempo choices because even on LP sometimes we have to because the recording time is limited on the medium itself. And so sometimes the performers would change things a little bit from how they might prefer it, just so that something would fit on a side of an LP, or so that it would fit on a piano roll. To everybody that just heard that, would you listen to more? I guess some of that question might... you might need to know the piece a little bit, or quite well, to have a great answer to that question. Would you listen to more? I know Antonio's answer. He would obviously say yes. Antonio, you seem to really like Ervin's playing. And Daniel, he has no artist page on Apple Music, just 3 albums there, it seems. I didn't look for him on Apple Music, but I'm glad to see. I believe when I looked him up, he recorded maybe 4 LPs. Maybe 3 of them are distributed currently. Rob, you say you would give it a few listens. Cool. Anybody else? I don't have an easy way to pull up the same exact spot from another pianist. But David, you say it depends on what he plays. Bedlington Groomer, not my bag, but you're a classical piano wuss. Don't say that. Joel Zoro, you're looking him up after the stream. Great. Okay. Bedlington Groomer, that might also be the style of music. I mean, that's some pretty dark music too. I love that. I love that kind of music. Sam, I will come back to your question when we have a chance later in the stream, Sam, about Clair de Lune. I can give you a quick, I don't want you to tune out, but I can give you a quick tip in that I have a video on YouTube that goes super in depth on the piece and a whole course on it, 2 hours on Clair de Lune. But I will come back and answer your question today. Okay, Antonio, my thoughts. I think his interpretations are interesting. I think his tone, especially on some of the couple recordings that are really there's more resolution and we can hear more detail in the playing. Sam, it's probably going to be about an hour because I have to get. I'm doing Bethany's Masterclass portion after this segment. So in probably like 45 minutes ish. Yeah. Jill Zorro, let me just repeat what you wrote in the chat here. You say you feel that their conception of music is different from ours, and you find it awe-inspiring to hear them play, but difficult to interpret that way. Yeah. The more you listen to Ervin's playing, I think, to make kind of a gross simplification, his tempi are very extreme, like super, super extreme, to the point where I don't have the Rhapsody sheet music available right now, but it's probably very little, not even remotely close to the tempo that Liszt marked. Is it interesting? Yes. Is it powerful? Yeah. Is it especially interesting today? Because I think we tend to hear pianists play a lot of this famous repertoire very similarly. Yes. I listened to a few of his other recordings, by the way, and he plays a lot of wrong notes. And I think we can also say that about a lot of pianists also from that generation, that there's a lot of wrong notes that made their way onto recordings. Just splatted octaves, especially I think at the beginning of the piece of this recording. If you go and listen to it, there's a lot of missed where, it might be an octave in a seventh or an octave in a ninth, and not just one or two, but all over the place. The beginning of his Brahms, Antonio, I listened to some of that. Today, we would probably call it sloppy. Technically, it would be... It's a little distracting because I want to hear the right sonority. And I don't want to hear, I can forgive some, but when it's like every other octave in some passages, man, I just want it to be a little cleaner. If you have a chance, for everybody here, go and listen to a little bit of his playing and then find another pianist, even from the same period, like Horowitz, for example. Horowitz recorded a lot of the same repertoire that you'll find that Nyiregyhazi recorded. And the difference between them is incredibly striking. And Horowitz, I think Horowitz was also known for being someone who was very lenient with his choices in tempi and how he interpreted things. At the time, I think people thought he really kind of strayed from the pack, and he took risks. And his performances sound so straight in comparison to what we just heard. I think there's a pro and a con to that. And to reference, Antonio, you mentioned Valet Doberman, and you sent me Valet Doberman. If you have a chance to listen to that, his recording, Nyiregyhazi's recording of Valet Doberman by Liszt, is over 20 minutes long. I believe Horowitz's is 13. Same notes. Taking the same repeats. I don't think even there are any repeats in the piece. And it's not like he took a section and played it again. That's just how much slower of a tempo he took. And if you listen to the two, I think the thing that gets lost in Nyiregyhazi's playing is a sense of line. Everything is really disconnected. And you really have to know the music to hear where things are going from one note to the next note to the next note, because he does connect them. But gosh, it's really difficult to hear that. It's really difficult to hear a singing quality in the phrases. So that's why I kind of thought it was interesting that some people mentioned lyrical. It is lyrical, especially in the sense that there's plenty of rubato and that there's plenty of freedom with time. And that's something I think we usually associate with lyricism in our playing. But not as lyrical in that notes from one melody, one note to the next note are spaced and spread so far apart that it can be really difficult to hear what the line is. Those are my takes on his playing. I think it's interesting. I think it is a breath of fresh air today. I probably think that even though some of the critics from the time, even then, said his playing was very extreme, I think it's less it would have been less extreme compared to his contemporaries than who we typically listen to today, which makes it sound even further away from the norm. Which, yeah, I'll come back to that same word. It's interesting. I don't think I would ever feel music the way he does. And people have said about my playing that I take a lot of liberties. Sometimes too many. Anyway, Antonio, thank you for sending that in. I'm glad we all got to take another listen and have a little discussion about it. And thanks for letting us know about this pianist. And who was it earlier who said C Drive? Looked him up. He's number 45 on a list of greatest classical pianists of the 20th century. I think that's saying something too, because he was not very prolific for most of his life. You can look up more about that online after the stream. Okay. Wonderful. Rotzi, I see you. You have your first public concert on Friday. Well, congrats and good luck. Have a great time. Let us know what you're playing in the chat. And Antonio, I'm going to wrap that up, unless you've got something else to add in about that. Yeah, C Drive, thanks. But yeah, I think it's probably time for us to move over to taking a listen to Bethany, an original piece of Bethany's and a little bit of her playing. Yes, back to our regularly scheduled stream, and for now, for something totally different. Okay. Yeah, let's move on. Bethany, I'm sure that you are still here. Bethany wrote a piece. This is an original composition of hers called Chronos. And Bethany, you said you wrote this about a year ago. And so I'm assuming you've had a lot of time for us to sit in your fingers and to think about things. And Bethany had some questions about, I think mostly about interpretation and less so about composition of it. So that's why I did not say in the title of this or in the description, this is not a composition masterclass. We probably aren't going to talk about anything related to that. But let's hear some of Chronos by Bethany. Lovely. All right, let's give Bethany a round of applause, both for the composition and for that performance. Yeah. Very nice. Yes. Antonio, you had said beautiful contemporary. Yeah, very nice. Jolzoro, Ghibli vibes. Yes, I'd agree. A bit, yeah, I'd agree. And Osilis, is it Osilis? Welcome. And also you said so beautiful, and you think it would work on guitar too. Yeah, I can hear that. Very nice. All right. Bethany, I think it already works really well. So there might be a couple little things that we can... I guess it's going to seem like I have a lot to talk about, but it all amounts to very, very minute changes that might make give it a little extra impact. But they're all very small changes to performance. I honestly don't have any... I love the notes you wrote. I love everything. It's a very well-structured composition, very moving. Lots of different characters at play. Very nice. Yeah. Okay. So from the top, and Bethany, is it okay, by the way, if I show the music to this? Because I know that, this is your hard work. And I'd never want to show a score that, I hope nobody here would go and just steal it and not at least buy it from you if they want to play it. So, but yeah, because okay, you say yeah for sure. Okay, so here is a little bit, and just don't pay attention to the notes I scribbled for now. We'll go through them one by one. Okay. From the top. Okay, first note. Your tempo, Bethany, was spot on 100, at least at the beginning. I had a feeling that maybe when this theme came back at the very end, it was a little bit slower than 100. But I'm wondering if... is that about it? Yeah. If we take it a hair faster, up to the high end of your tempo marking, up to 110 instead of 100, is that too fast for this to still feel like bells to you? So that would be... If it's not too fast for you, Bethany, I would suggest taking the faster end of your tempo marking. I like the sense of momentum that it gives us through all of our mixed meter bars. One notational thing just occurred to me. It's pretty simple to get that you mean by 10/8 that this is 3 plus 3 plus 2 and 2, or 3 plus 3 plus 4. So, but, well, I guess that's a question for you, Bethany. Do you feel this as each bar having 3 pulses or 4 pulses? So, yeah, for those, this kind of goes back into the difference between compound meter and simple meter and how this is a mixed meter. Bethany's not dividing 10/8 into 5 equal beats, but we have a beat, and then either one beat or another beat. Antonio, I liked Bethany's Bethany's tempo too, but there's a reason why I'm suggesting a little faster that has to do with what comes next. Okay, Bethany, you say 3 plus 3 plus 4, so we'll get rid of this last one. So 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, and... That makes sense then, that these are truly over here. These are really syncopations and not heavier. Okay. Great. If that's what you mean, you might consider also writing that over 8. So I'm sure you've seen these mixed meter things like 3 plus 3 plus 4 over 8. And do it, both places. It would be in place of the 10. Or you could have the 10... I can't think off the top of my head how that would typically be notated. But you might show 10-8 in one place, and then next to it in parentheses, you would show 3 plus 4 over 8. Just to help cue us in that that's really how you intend the division to be. Because even I had a question here about that. Face, yeah. No, no Dream Theater today. Oh, yeah, Antonio. Yep. We need a sense of pulse, Antonio. Okay, so Bethany, I'm recommending a slightly faster tempo. Not actually because of this segment, but because of what happens when we go beyond and we get to, let's not do that, our first section with freedom, which we're going to come back to this. This is much more difficult to sight read, so bear with me. Especially because you said our tempo with more freedom. I think this could be really successful if it was almost like a meno mosso. Poco meno mosso, where we have more time to explore. Yeah. We're going to come back to that, but does that make sense, Bethany? Oh, yeah, Jill Zora. Just wait for it. Yeah, so Bethany, I think it could be even more successful if this opening and all of this main theme, if it has a little bit more energy, and not just where you say at the bottom, toward the bottom of this page, with growing energy, not just there, but if we lead into this very dramatic change with a faster tempo, we're going to be able to show even more contrast between those sections. And I think that also might even give you the freedom when we get to the second section that perhaps all of our eighth notes... I can't read it that fast. I'm trying to exaggerate the firm sense of pulse because I don't think that's actually what we want in this section. I think we want that really precise pulse to be intrinsically or just absolutely linked, fused to this motif. And I know that you have some of that in this other middle section here, but it doesn't need to be quite as pronounced. My opinion. I know, it's your piece, Bethany. But that's how I came to this conclusion that maybe we want a slightly faster tempo at the beginning so that we have more room to slow down the two middle sections that we're going to come to. Without making them so slow that they feel disconnected from everything else. Okay, next up, second line here, I wrote down a more different color for the lower voice that you're introducing. So instead of, so if I start right at measure 8, if we play this B flat out, I'm just going to get rid of that marking so I have more room to write here. But if we play that B flat out as much as the first one that begins the theme, it doesn't sound like we have two voices, but it sounds like we have bum, da, dum. And then we start to hear the separation of the voices after that. Right? But I think if we do more to show a difference where that first stem down is introduced here. So that was too little. So maybe sneaking this lower B flat in a little bit more so that it really is separated from our upper line that's continuing to ascend versus this secondary line that's descending, right? So yeah. Cool. Okay. And yeah, Faze, yeah, kudos to score this, absolutely. Makes it possible to talk about it, right? Okay, great, Bethany. Yeah. By the way, as we move down the page here, love your marking. Do not arpeggiate. Love it. And your help for the right hand and that you wrote it. So even, I mean, that would be an insane reach for quite a few people. I can't even reach that 10th, and I've got pretty large hands. But you wrote it in a way that the right hand can actually take that note. By the way, for everybody, that's what that bracket means if you haven't seen that before. That means take that note, in this case F, with the upper hand. Okay, great marking, because that would easily otherwise turn into. Right, and that could, we could lose the sense of this pulse because this becomes too romantic. Okay, measure 16. More pianissimo, Bethany. You do a lot of this kind of stuff throughout the piece, which is great. We have a little thing and then an echo. And here, you didn't write echo like you wrote later in the piece, but there is a definite dynamic change. You could write echo like you did, unless you really want it to be something different than what you show later. But my first inclination was, because of the change in dynamic, this is the first time. And then really, it could be, you might even consider writing a subito pianissimo, or triple P, pianissimo, just to be sure that we're actually making a significant change from the hairpin that you leave with in measure 15. Because that relaxes, which is really nice. But then we still have room to take that a whole notch softer. Again, that makes an even greater contrast for where we're going in measure 19. So here's with growing energy. So having that pianissimo and really exaggerating it will help show that marking even more, and will allow you more space to do more with the crescendo that leads into our 8/8. Cool? Everybody good so far? Any questions from anybody about the score or anything else before we continue on? I'll keep reading as much as I possibly can. So as we go on to the next page. Oh, Antonio. Yeah, absolutely. Especially those really big moments. Antonio said you'd love to hear this piece played on a grand, like an acoustic, like a 9-footer. I think, yeah, some of those really huge climactic moments would be so rich and powerful. Yeah. Okay, let's move on. Measure 24. So, And then 12. Let's see. Good. Okay. Loved, Bethany. I loved in your performance your big crescendo into 28, that this dynamic change. Here's an interesting thing, Bethany, that you can highlight from a composer's point of view, because I think people would have a lot of questions about this if they saw a marking like this from any other composer. What do you mean when you have a crescendo written in 24 and still under that crescendo, a hairpin that says crescendo in 28 that leads us to forte? What does that mean, Bethany? I think I know your intention, but I see when I scroll through posts on Facebook groups and whatnot, I see people have questions about these kinds of markings from other composers too. Well, like, are they redundant? Do they mean the same thing? Why are there two there? If is there a crescendo at 20? Is one of them not supposed to be there? Is there a crescendo at 24 that goes through 28? Is the one at 24 not supposed to be there? Are we only supposed to crescendo from 27 into 28? Joe Zorro, there you go. Foo Fighter, you say rubato. That's probably not what Bethany means. Although hairpins sometimes in Brahms and in Chopin, there's this big theory that's relatively recent that hairpins mean to take rubato, or they show the give and take of time. And it really works because Chopin shows words like crescendo and then a hairpin right in the same place. Yes, Bethany, you say crescendo starting at measure 24, like a polka crescendo, and then a more dramatic one from 27 into 28. 100%. I got that from reading it. I don't think it's unclear. I think that it is, it follows more conventional conventions. So I don't think it needs to be changed, but I do know that would cause some confusion for some people. So yes, starting in 24, mini crescendo, you might write polka crescendo, maybe. That might help make it a little more clear. Yeah. Yes, Bethany. Great. I think we probably said that at the same time as you were typing that in. Yeah, Foo Fighter. Chopin is never redundant. 100%. That's right. That's why. Yeah, a composer like that, you always have to say every marking is there for a really specific reason. And if there's a dynamic mark, a text dynamic mark, and a hairpin in the same place, they definitely mean two different things. And only one has to do actually with the dynamic of the playing. So 100% correct, yeah. C drive, Bethany, you could feel free to answer this too. For your take as a composer, what's the difference between crescendo text and the crescendo hairpin, and are they interchangeable? Nathaniel, we're going to come back to that because we have to clear that at what you just said. When I write music, I use a crescendo text. Typically, if I want to, I think Beth and I are going to say the same thing here. Yeah, I use the text if the crescendo is over many, many bars, where it would be graphically messy or unclear to use the hairpin. And I use the hairpin when it's a short period of time. I usually won't use a hairpin for more than 4 measures ever. And sometimes you might get 6 measures on a system, sometimes 8, depending on how small the notation is. Yeah. But yeah, I typically my kind of rule is if it's more than a 4-bar crescendo, I don't use a hairpin anymore. I revert to the text marking. And if it's shorter, I'll tend to use a hairpin. I think the hairpin, I think it shows a greater change, which is exactly how Bethany used it. So yeah, Bethany, what you commented and what I said, I think they're the same thing. And the way you used it in the piece that you just showed, the text crescendo shows a more mild crescendo and the hairpin shows a greater crescendo, which, yeah, I think we also agree on that too. Okay. So Nathaniel, you said hairpins indicate lingering a bit when they open and close again. Seymour, and you said Seymour Bernstein said it in his video on the Chopin Prelude number 4. That, yeah. Okay, so Nathaniel, what hairpins mean for different composers? They have different implications. And in great part, if we're reading a fine score like an text for Chopin, we can take a lot of the hairpin markings to show how time is moved, where Chopin intends you, the performer, to take rubato. As the hairpin opens, we push forward. As the hairpin closes, we pull back. I wanted to bring that up because there was a recent thing I saw in a Facebook group about a teacher teaching that when a crescendo begins, at the beginning of a hairpin, for example, and I'll just use this example of Bethany's. Okay, got to come back to that. So this teacher was making a point that at the beginning of a crescendo, you have an opportunity to do the opposite of what's marked. And there was so much arguing online that this teacher didn't know what they were talking about by saying at the beginning of a crescendo, you get softer. And this reminded me, your point reminded me of this because, Nathaniel, because what do hairpins and what do dynamic changes really mean? They mean it. They're showing a change, right? And I think at the most basic level, you see a hairpin or the word crescendo, and it means get louder. And the getting louder starts at the beginning of the hairpin, and it ends at the end, or in this case, where Bethany has shown us, a new dynamic, forte, right? However, and there are some really famous, there are plenty of cases like this, anytime that there's a dynamic change, there is an opportunity to show a greater or give the impression of a greater change if you allow a movement slightly in the opposite direction at the beginning of the marking. So let me play this for you two different ways. So I'll start in 24. I'll show a very mild crescendo, and then only a crescendo from the dynamic I am into measure 28. I hope I can execute that. Here we go. Sorry for the rhythmic problem there. Let's see. That's how it goes. Okay. Now let me do a little bit of the exaggeration. And if I need to play it cleaner so we get a better comparison, I'll give it a try. But this time I'm going to start in 24. When I get to the 12/8 bar, there's going to be a slight drop in dynamic at the beginning of the measure to make forte in 28 show an even bigger impact. Let me do that again. Let me do it both ways. So the first way again, and hopefully I'll play the notes in the 12/8 bar correctly. Okay. And then the second way, with a little drop where the hairpin begins. Okay. Both of those, I think, would be valid interpretations of what's marked on the page. And you can also get in the habit of when you see a dynamic change, it doesn't always mean do the opposite. First, phase-ish, you like 2 better. It 2 shows it really kind of explodes, right? It still doesn't disobey the score, right? Now, we need to be careful about where we employ that, because depending on the dynamic we've just come from, we might not at all want to show something opposite. It might not need any more emphasis. For example, even in this particular piece, if Bethany had marked, instead of a crescendo, if this was a day crescendo across 3 bars, well, we don't need to emphasize anything because it's been given to us by the music. I bring this up because I was just, this was a group of teachers, piano teachers, talking about this, and it was like their minds were blown that you could interpret a crescendo marking as first getting a little softer and then actually obeying the marking. And it absolutely can happen. And great pianists use this technique all over the place. It is not an uncommon thing. So anyway, something like that is in the music. If I can remember to, at the end of talking about Bethany's piece, there's a super famous example of this in the coda of Chopin's First Ballade that like everybody who ever performs the piece does. And it's not marked in the score any other way than just a hairpin, which in this particular case at Chopin actually means a dynamic change. Anyway, if I remember to do that, we're going to go back there because it's such a famous thing, and every recording you will put on, like 99.9% of performers do that, where they go in the opposite direction and then go for it. And everybody knows that piece. Okay. Nathaniel, you say a lot of reverb today. Yes. I have it. It's all on the piano mics. It was a change. Is it bothering people? Because I can turn it off if it's bothering people. But I thought it made the piano sound nicer. But yeah, just let me know. I can turn it off if it's disconcerting. And hey, W.S. Jade, I haven't seen you in a long time. Yes, dynamics are all relative. You said you're surprised that teacher was called out so much. It was like, there were like 150 comments saying that this master teacher, it was a person invited to give a public masterclass to very, very talented students. And there were some 150 people that said that teacher didn't know what they were talking about. Instead of saying, I've never heard that before. Maybe there's actually some truth in that. Anyway, you could tell it got me a little riled. Okay, let me go back up to Bedlington Groomer. You said, so does that mean it's important to really know each composer to understand their particular dynamic markings, what they might mean, or the nuances? Yes. That's the tip of the iceberg, Bedlington Groomer, because not only do different dynamics, sure, they mean stronger and softer, forte and piano, of course, but how strong and how soft mean different things from different composers. They mean different things from different periods of music. The color that we show would be different. Let's take maybe 2 more extreme examples. How you might show or play a forte or fortissimo in Beethoven is going to be very different than a forte or fortissimo in Rachmaninoff. And in Chopin, we don't really hear music played this way today, but historically we know that Chopin rarely actually played that loudly. He was called a master of the soft dynamics. And so people that heard him play would say he played in shades of piano. Everything was in shades of piano, and once in a while there'd be something that was bigger. Today we hear some of the big pieces and the etudes, for example, all kinds of big repertoire from Chopin, and we just blast through them today. Chopin himself wouldn't have played them that way. Doesn't matter that we don't have recordings of it. We know because of letters from the time. We know because of people who heard him play. Lots and lots of comments about the delicacy of his playing, and that pianissimo from Chopin was like whisper quiet, and piano wasn't that much louder, and mezzo forte wasn't that much louder than piano. So if we extrapolate that out, a forte from Chopin himself wouldn't be aggressive in any way. So we hear Chopin's music a little different today from pretty much everybody who plays it. I like it. I like a bigger sound personally, but it's an interesting bit of history to know. Julio, that little mini piano, that's a Lego piano. It's not the really like massive Lego piano, but it's a small one. So I built that. Okay. Da, 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 da. Huh. Okay, let me see. Yeah, Gel Zorro. I love that. You said this kind of thing happens on guitar all the time, where you take more liberty with the dynamic because you don't have a lot of room to begin with, right? You don't have a huge range like a piano does to show big sweeping changes, so you have to manufacture a little bit of those. Yeah. Oh, WSJ, good question. The fortissimo in the Revolutionary Etude, I think if you heard Chopin play it, you'd be surprised. It would still sound exciting, but it wouldn't be like biting your ear off. And, you know, that brings up a really interesting point. And Bethany, I promise we're going to get back to your piece. I think it brings up an interesting point because not only was Chopin's piano much easier to play in that there was a lot less weight in the keys, it was a lot easier to play forte than most modern instruments. And so it took so much less effort, combined with the fact that Chopin rarely used the really big dynamics when he played. And if he did, it was a more probably tame version than what we hear today. You combine those two things, and the etudes aren't easy. They don't become easy by any stretch, but they are easier if you think about, oh, I could play this fortissimo passage, but I could play it more like I'm going to execute mezzo forte from what we're familiar with today, and it would be the right dynamic, and it would be on a piano where the keys just fall so much easier. So we'd get that impact with a lot less effort. And that puts a different perspective on the difficulty of the etudes and their intended difficulty as well. The etudes are even more difficult to play today if we interpret the tempi and the dynamics as we do with all other modern music and on the modern instrument. They're far more difficult to play today than they were when Chopin wrote them. They were always difficult. Julio, I do have that. We'll come back to your question. Okay, and Bedlington Grimmer, you said you love diving into the nuances. After years of only hearing about the obvious tip of the iceberg. Yes, okay. All right, we need to jump back into Bethany's piece. Let's see. Oh, there was one thing that I erased that I wanted to make sure we talked about, and that is Bethany. Here's another place. You wrote both of these in 28. They are up till here exactly the same. I guess the B included if we do kind of that, right? I think this is another opportunity to show a difference between these two, right? As a great player, we never want to play the same thing twice in a row, even if there isn't a change marked in the music. So. And if you don't want to give away a decrescendo too early, for example, in the second repeat of this statement, in the 10-8 bar, if you don't want to give away that, maybe play 29 even bigger than 28. So then we'll have to be sure that leading into 28, it's not quite as big. So I showed like forte plus and then with a crescendo through that phrase to show bigger contrast to the decrescendo and mezzo forte that's coming up when we change harmony in the 11/8. Yeah. Bethany, do you take one pedal? Thanks, Bethany. Yeah, great. Do you take one pedal from 30? No, definitely not. One pedal from 31, the G flat, and you keep it down? Yeah. I think you do. If you don't, I would definitely do that. I think remembering that all got blurred together, which was really nice. Your poco rit that you show in 33, especially now if we're taking a faster tempo at the beginning, when we get to 34, we want a larger change. We might want a little more time than one measure to make that change happen. So going back to the 11/8, you could even kick this off with bringing out that little line. Or, da, 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 da. And then we've started to pull things back, maybe in the middle of 31 instead of in 33. Something to consider there. Okay. Bethany, I know you had some questions about pedaling in the coming section, and I'm going to try to play as much of this as I can to show you. So I wrote in finger sustain, but let me see if that's actually something that is possible here. Yeah. Okay, some of it might be. You might consider holding some of these pitches that are creating our resonance if you're not doing this, yeah, so that we can change pedal without, and help keep things clear, but without losing so much resonance, right? So we'd want to change the pedal. You don't have to change it anywhere in that bar if you don't want to, I don't think. But if you did want to show more clarity, you could pedal here. That would be the only pedal I'd probably take. And if you pedal on our second pulse, where that middle C is in parentheses, and you've held, maybe even tied all three notes in the left hand, where they are sustaining across the pedal change. Let me show that a bit bigger. If I'm playing this bar, instead of letting these go and then pedaling, where we lose everything that was in the bass, right? That's why that doesn't work. But if you hold these three, and we can change the pedal in the meantime, and we still maintain that really clean harmony, that foundation that everything else is working on top of, I really like that. Now, if we're going to be really picky about that, you do lose the E flat that's supposed to be sustaining. So I would listen both ways. And by the way, hold on, let me put the music back up for that. So it was this E flat that if we pedal, we end up losing the sustain of that note. Because there's no way we can really hold that and play. That would be way too uncomfortable. So I would listen between the two, because even if we've played that E flat and we take a pedal versus don't take a pedal, how do you feel about the loss of that note? Or has the decay been natural enough of that pitch that by the time we get to our 4 at the end of the bar, or sorry, our second big beat, not the 4, but here, if we pedal it and we lose it, does it make a big impact, and is it too big for you? And if it's too big for you, then hold the pedal down, right, for the continuation. The trouble is then we also can't show your rest that you did mark there. At least not without pedaling again, and then things get really thin. So I would pedal the way I've marked on the page. You say, the E flat is still there in spirit. Love it. Love it. And yeah, Ellen and phase, mode mixture, yes. Yep. And it's much more than just major, minor. Bethany, would you also call this piece polytonal in some ways? You use some quartal harmony. Quartal means harmony built instead of in thirds, like our typical triads, like a major triad built in thirds. Sometimes you've used things built in fourths, like that, or that's, I guess, still a third. They're something really dissonant. But quartal harmony is harmony built in fourths. So, right, to make a third, to make a triad, a typical major triad, we stack thirds on top of each other. And then later in the piece, what Bethany's done is do things like stack fourths, like that, or that, on top of one another. Yeah, Bethany. Yeah, it gives a really interesting tonality to what we're working on. And it's still, like, technically, it still fits a mode, but it adds a contemporary sense of dissonance, I think. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you say Lydian's probably in there somewhere. Yeah, I think I heard that too. Okay, so that was a little bit of finger sustain to help pedaling Bethany, and now... So now I'm playing 37. I think this is an opportunity because of the running line in the left hand. Yeah, that if we pedal that whole thing, the first half of the bar sounds nice because most of your notes in that run are chord tones, except for the A flat. We could even fudge and say the A flat's a chord tone too. That sounds pretty good, but then the second half of the bar gets really blurry because everything is stepwise. So here you have an opportunity, if you're okay with not having your bass ring for the entire bar, so releasing the pedal somewhere around here, somewhere in the middle, so we still get that sustain, yeah, and then let it go. And of course, the way you've written it, we would pay attention to the sustain in the right hand, the finger sustain, so that we don't lose those across our pedal change. Yep. You say, okay, that is the measure while you're asking pedal questions. Great. I actually don't even think that, we've talked before, Bethany, about half pedaling, quarter pedaling, etc. I don't even think I would choose that in this particular case. I think I would choose a more direct release. Yeah. Because a half pedal could work. And if you had an instrument that could do it, yeah, you could do it, and you could retain some sense of that, the texture that's underneath there. But I also really like the way it sounds with just a complete change of the pedal, where we get to hear the nuance in the left-hand line. Yeah. Okay. Going on. Bethany, let me know, did you have any other particular questions about pedal? Write those in the chat, please. But just going on for a minute. 39 into 40 and then 41. Right? We have a lot of dissonance in 40 that builds up to this resolution in opposite directions. I would really love if you had take enough time in the execution of 40 and especially 41 to show both resolutions really clearly. The G to the A and the D flat to C. And we need a fairly significant amount of time there to really be sure that both of those speak. Yep. One more pedaling thing, I guess. After this. We could do a lot more change of pedal, or you could just play this very dry if you wanted to. I think some pedal would be better. Like, and then somewhere in there, those three. Or drier in the second half. Yeah, like you just said. And that could be just one release of pedal that probably happens here. Again, now if you had the ability to half pedal, it would be a slow release from full pedal through half pedal to full release. I guess this, instead of being a P, would be off. And then it sounds really, really, really smooth. Mm-hmm. Ideally, that would be the case. You could do a full pedal change there. It's not, doesn't have quite the that effect of something speaking and growing out of this texture as if you could do half pedal, but it's pretty close. Okay. All right. I don't think I have too much else for you, Bethany. Some of the stuff that we've just talked about, wherever you can use finger sustain to help clean pedal up. I know some of these are going to get a little more difficult. Like here. Love that harmony. (46), you could just model the pedaling we did in whatever bar that was, 38, 37 on the previous page. Very similar, right? But great key change there. The 11/8 in measure 48. I think that might be a great opportunity to actually just take one pedal, especially if we take this poco writ either in 49 or we start it maybe just a little earlier here. I don't mind that blur, and it provides a little bit of excitement or change in texture that is going to lead us to this key change. And again, I started the writ a little earlier also to make sure that we get enough time from 48 into 49 that we can really show an arrival that measure 50, we are coming back to something very familiar. And it's quite unexpected. I think setting that up with more time would be great. And maybe even consider not taking the odd tempo right on beat 1, but maybe like shifted just subtly partway through the bar so that when we arrive, there's that moment of rest that feels really nice. And then we're back. Yeah? Okay. Any more questions, Bethany, so far? Give you a second to respond. And I don't think... only a couple very short more things to talk about with the piece, but very short. Okay, readability with measure 55. Yes, okay. Showing that to everybody. Measure 55, 53, 54, 55 starts here. And we can see that we have a couple measures after that. Yeah, there are a couple different lines there. I think there's nothing wrong with the notation of it. The only other way to notate something like this would be to take one or two of your middle textures and put them on a third system in the middle. Occasionally you'll see Liszt do this, but perhaps like everything that's this texture would be on a separate staff in between, and it would probably be marked treble clef. And then you'd add to that this descending line. Whether that is easier or more difficult to read, I think that would be more difficult to sight read, but it would show the movement of the voices more clearly. So I think you need to choose between which would you prefer? Do you want it to be a little easier to sight read? It's still not super easy, but you might have a chance at getting through it closer to tempo. But as soon as the score explodes into 3 staves in a system, that's going to significantly slow down our ability to process all that information, unless you're dealing with somebody that has a lot of experience reading like a conductor score or something like that. Multiple staves in a system. Most pianists aren't. They don't have that experience. So it's just a choice of compromise. There isn't anything wrong with what you wrote. And your hand divisions are great. That's nice and helpful. I can still see as I go along. The inner lines are clear enough that I can still make out where they're supposed to be going and how they're falling. That's helped maybe a little bit by the fact that like this line is all descending by step until here. Yeah. So that helps a little bit. And the other texture is an ostinato, which is also great. If those things were changing, I think that you might want to seriously consider putting 3 staves on a system. But because I think those are a little more predictable, especially the ostinato part, I think it's okay the way it is. Thanks, Bethany. I am a very good sight reader, and I also have a lot of experience reading orchestral scores and choral scores and reducing them on the fly. So I wouldn't take my read through as a great representation of most, even professionals. I think they would be reading much more slowly. Yeah. But yeah, I don't think you need to change it, Bethany. Hello, Donna. Okay, let's see. Do I have any more here? Okay, similar to what we talked about a few minutes ago on the next page, Bethany, you have again a repeat, nearly repeat of. Oh, we do have a repeat, right? So the first bar, 65. It isn't a repeat. Very similar. Again, I would think about the color of your tone in 66 because our melody is the same. How can we further show a difference between what we did in 65 and what we are doing in 66? Can we change the voicing of something? Are we going to bring the left hand out more in 65? And maybe the right hand out more than the left in 66? Do we want to change the dynamic in general? If you think about texture or color in a more even vivid sense than that, do we want to have 2 very specific images about what forte means in these places that will help us show a difference? Through there, and then really make a big change in the next bar. There, your harmony there gives you a huge opportunity to even take like a quasi-subito dynamic. That would be really nice. And it would just, it would be unexpected again. And that's always, I guess, what I'm thinking about as a performer is how can I keep the listener on their toes and show them more and more interesting things as we go. Where am I going to draw their interest to? And when we have a motif like this, which is very similar from bar to bar, the harmony is changing, even the notes are changing in 67, but there's this underpinning that's the same. I think we can have a fair amount of liberty. And then, okay, it looks like you said 68, your dynamic is missing. Oh, thank you, Donna. Okay. Bethany, I loved when you got to the Meno Mosso. I loved the really big difference that you made. I really loved how great, how big of a change that was. You took plenty of time on the fermata, which was lovely. And maybe you could do even more of something that you're already doing, which is showing that I think of this kind of like as, it's almost like a machine trying to start up again, and it's having trouble. And we get repeat after repeat. They're different. There's this fighting within the line in 70 and 71, and then again there in 72, 73. I'm playing this too fast. You could even do maybe the opposite of what I'm doing. Yeah. Oh. There we go. But really exaggerating this stopping and starting within your phrase, because I think there's great. You say the clock is restarting. Yeah. So there is this underlying image that's supposed to be there. And I think you're already on the right track with that, and you might be able to double your liberties that you're taking. And it would be really, really effective. Because then when we get this bigger to the big climax, I think that'll be extra effective. Yes. Okay. One more thing and then we'll wrap up. This is the only place, measure 99, Bethany, where you have omitted a note from your main motif, probably for the sake of playability. But I do think that it's possible to play that note that you omitted. Let me just double check. Yeah. And especially because I think you were taking a slightly slower tempo at the end here than at the very beginning. You could totally add in the F that's missing and keep the motif going. There and here where it happens again in 103. Yeah, we just need to take enough time on the roll. So, just something to consider. Yeah. Yes, it is possible. Yes. Do you need to show hand divisions there? No. Let the performer figure that out. I think you've shown enough in the past of how that can go that it's fine. Yeah. Woo. Let's give another round of applause to Bethany. Really lovely piece. Thanks so much for sharing. Your writing is always very interesting, and love the harmonies that you use. It's a great, really like just nice combination of familiar but different and you all at the same time. So yeah. Yeah, rounds of applause for Bethany. Very nice. Okay. All right. Goodness gracious. I took a little longer than that than I expected, but thanks everybody for sticking around. And yeah, we had some really great questions and tangents that we went on in the middle of that. Hello, Alex. I can't remember if I said hello to you at the beginning or not, but if I didn't, hello. Okay, we had a bunch of questions, a couple that got dropped in the chat along the way, and I also had one come in that I really wanted to talk about from June that came in before the stream. So, first, oh, great, Alex. First up is our June. Is June, are you still here? And is Sam still here? I know we've had people kind of coming in and out, and that's fine. June. Hello, June. Let me see where I can find the question that June wrote in, and especially if Sam's not here, then Bethany, I'm going to come back to the Chopin Ballade hairpin because I want to answer some of the other questions, but then we can revisit that topic if we still have time. But thanks for the reminder. Let's see. Yeah, I think Sam would have written back if he was still here. So apologies to Sam for not getting to his question about Clair de Lune. But June, your question, you had a question about, you said dusting pieces off. So some things that we've learned, and when we spend a fair amount of time practicing them, how can we keep them either maybe playable or more fresh? Or if we come back in a couple weeks, make sure that we aren't just starting from scratch over again. June, I think that was the crux of your question. Is that right? I can try to pull it up. Okay, you said that's it. Great. Okay, good. So, a great deal of how easy it is to refresh a piece or to keep it in our fingers has to do with how we've practiced it in the meantime while we're working on it. And so the more detailed and this is going to sound cliche but I'm going to expand on it. The more detailed and purposeful our practice is, the easier it's going to be to remember those notes and the hand movements and everything that's involved in learning a particular piece. By that, I mean, how often during your practice, for example, yeah, June. So that's a good starting point, what you just said. We'll start there. You question whether you learned it well enough to begin with. I think a lot of us, and June, respond to this directly, please, if you can. A lot of us play and practice, and we kind of just go segment by segment. And we might start at the beginning and go to the end. And occasionally, maybe we'll say, we've talked on the stream before about doing other kinds of things in our practice, like perhaps starting at the end and going to the beginning, right? How many people do that versus breaking our practice up in more varied ways? So if we're talking about just practicing a single piece, are we just starting at the beginning and working our way through, even if it is maybe phrase by phrase or page by page? How many people do that? Show of hands. Versus how many people skip around in your practice? You can get quite far without doing some of what I'm about to describe. Gel Zorro, you put your hand up. June, you say you try to skip around. Good. Yeah. Okay, so there's different kinds of ways. This is expanding on something we've talked about. Bethany, you say skip around. This is expanding on a theme that we've talked about in other streams, and that's called interleaved practice. Interleaved practice, especially when we take it to an extreme point, is probably the best thing I know of to help retain music that we've already learned. It also is a great test of whether you've learned something well enough. So June, you say you got the piece good enough to record it and pretty much could play it without the music. Okay, so the kind of interleaved practice that I'm talking about is post-memorized. So memorized is that is kind of a prereq to being able to do this. But we can start without it being memorized. Absolutely, yes, Rhodesy. So David, you read through a whole thing once, or a page, or a piece, and then you pick a chunk to concentrate on. Great. Let's divide interleaved practice into a couple different things. I need to choose a piece. Okay, let's do this. Because I have a student working on this, and I've been a little obsessed with this piece. Thanks, Rodsy. Catherine, you say, depending on the difficulty of the piece or the difficulty, you have to practice properly following your teacher's advice. Okay, yes. And how that practice works depends on the difficulty of the piece, yeah. Okay. So what do we know about interleaved practice? Interleaved practice can take a couple forms, from being working on the same piece of music. There's a little Bach Busoni. It's not very fast. It looks much more intimidating on the page than it is. Let's divide this into some sections real quick. We've got the beginning, an introduction. Where that ends, we have a main theme. Okay, and then we've got... okay, then the end of a theme here. And then another section, and another section, and then a new theme. So each of these, I'm just trying to quickly show a variety of segments. The way a lot of people will use interleaved practice is to say, I'm going to start one segment, and I'm going to practice that. So this is from the beginning of the piece. Okay, and then let's say we're working on that for whatever reason we have. And we might do a couple repetitions and work on some things. And then if we're intentionally interleaving our practice, we're going to skip to another section. Maybe not the directly next one. Maybe, what about this section at the end of the page? Etc. Okay, maybe we'll work on that for a little while. And that becomes interleaved practice, and maybe all we have time for are those two segments. The most important thing that we did was that we limited repetitions of a certain section, and then we also changed the segment we were practicing. And you could kind of call that the underpinning of what interleaved practice is. But let's go a step further. Can you go to another piece of repertoire? So, something else. Sorry, I'm not going to go further today. What if you practice some of that? Totally different style piece. That's really important. Different dynamic, totally different way of using our body to play. Now we're interleaving two different pieces, and maybe we'll spend 10 minutes or 15 minutes on what I just did, Bach Busoni, and then on Chopin. And we can have the score open for both of those. And we continue doing that. We do a little bit of repetition of the blocks that we're working on, but now we've interleaved one piece with another piece. Let's say further on in our practice, we want to more exclusively work on just one piece, and we've gotten it memorized. Now, can we interleave all kinds of different segments without opening the score up, which I cannot do with that because I don't know it that well. Oh, I'm sorry, Alex. Okay, so now if I choose a section, I can't play this at tempo. But for example, okay, the Chopin Ballade. The bar before the coda begins is that one. Where the coda begins is... right? Where that changes is... etc. Let's see. There isn't really another piece of the puzzle. Maybe a bit later. That would be in the next spot. Yeah. Okay, so I am doing that all from memory. It's not nearly good enough. But, okay, so now I've got all these segments that I can start different places, and I can start in any single one of them. When we really know a piece really well, and we want to reinforce exactly what it is that we're playing, or say it's memorized, but we want to do some extreme work on perfecting for performance, we would jump from section to section and do one repetition only. So that would mean, for example, starting here, going through that, then doing a repetition from all from memory, hopefully. Better than that. Okay, and I'm not going from one segment to the next one with a pause. I'm saying if we've got 10, I'm picking random numbers. 5, and then 2, and then 8, and then 4, and then 1, and then 10. And we're jumping around to all of those. But we get one repetition to start from each place. And in every repetition, if you needed to write down what didn't go well, what you need to work on for the next blocked practice session, but not during your interleaved practice. Don't get stuck on it and say, I'm going to do a lot of work. And focus on, I could do that. I could say, oh, this is really unclear, and this is not to tempo, etc. There are plenty of things that I could pick on about what I just played. But if I'm working on interleaved practice, which is really retention, right? I'm not going to get stuck on those. I'm going to write them down or remember them for when I go back and change to a different type of practice. The furthest we can take this is then saying, if you have a practice, let's say we have 2 practice sessions in the day. For simplicity's sake, they're an hour each. And our warm-up is already done. We don't need to sit down. We don't need to play anything or warm up to get going. That's done. Okay. Now, when you sit down and you're working on a piece that you want to retain for a long time, the first thing you play when you sit down is the hardest section. And guess what? You get one time to play it. Only one time. You start with it. You don't pull the score up. Start with that bar. Play that segment. Remember or write down what needs to be worked on for when you have time to work on it. Then, don't even work on the same piece anymore. Switch pieces, switch your type of practice, work on something else for the next 30 minutes. Then come back 30 minutes later, pick a different section of the original piece that you want to work on retention. Pick a different section than the one you did at the beginning. Go through that. Okay, even if your performance during your one playthrough isn't very good, you're learning a tremendous amount because you're really limiting the time that you have to spend on the notes. If we can't do this yet, we don't know the piece well enough, and there's no chance that we're going to retain it in the future. Yeah. When you can do this, at a really high level or an advanced level, this can take your performance of a piece from like really pretty good and pretty stable and pretty, you can count on it. You know, you feel pretty good about it. We go from that stage to like rock solid. This is never going to fail me in the most anxiety-driven circumstances. This is always going to be there for me, and it's never going to leave. Not all of us need to get there, right? But we can learn a lot from doing this kind of practice. And if you want something to stick around in your fingers and in your hands, we need to get used to our brain being able to recall it at a moment's notice without any attempt, like a prior attempt at it. First attempt. And we do that, if we do that kind of practice while the piece is fresh and while we're still doing all of our repetitions and blocked practice and slow practice and so on, you're going to have things stick hugely for you. And over days, weeks, maybe even a month without touching it. Now, how good you become at that is, of course, like anything else, the more you practice doing that kind of interleaved practice, the better your brain is going to be at retaining that information. It's going to know we've switched into this gear, and this is what we're working on. And this is really important. It's always going to be pretty good because of all the variation, but it will continue to get better with practice, right? The other part of your question, June, has to do with how often then we need to revisit a piece of music. And the less great our interleaved practice is, the more we need to revisit music on a regular basis in order to keep it in our fingers. Yeah, Gelzoro. Interleaved. Gelzoro, it's, yeah, hopefully. Hopefully you're doing that. So, June, I would say for most people, if you're starting this and you haven't done this kind of practice before and we want to retain pieces, start with playing them every 3 days and doing some work on them every 3 days still. And then we can get to a point where those 3 days turn into 4 days, those 4 days turn into 5, and so on. And then maybe we're saying once a week, we revisit the piece. And that once a week, maybe that once a week, we need to spend a little time and work on some of the passages and actually practice them. Beyond that, you'll get to the point where you could say that once a week run through, while the piece isn't going to be as good technically as it was when you were doing a lot of focused practice, that once a week run through is going to keep 99% of what's in the fingers there. We can't start with once a week, but we can get there. And eventually, you can get much, much longer span of time than 1 week without doing any work. That's part of how some of the pianists that are touring the world, that's part of how they can have 4 programs, 5 programs, all in their fingers, all simultaneously. That's some 8 to 10 hours, 8 hours of music, maybe more. They can do that because they're using this type of practice, interleaved practice, really, really well. And they've gotten to the point where they don't need to visit that repertoire all the time. So they might revisit what's coming up in the next couple days. That'll get worked on really hard. What's coming up at the end of the month gets a little bit of work, or none. And everything alternates. And we just continue cycling things. Yeah, Bedlington Groomer, you say, so with interleaved practice, yes, is this what you'd be writing into your daily practice goals, like today's goal section for each piece for another day? Yeah. Yeah, you could definitely pre-plan it and write it down. And the hardest part about doing it for everyone is accepting that it's not going to be good. The goal of doing this isn't about, it's not about all of the fine detail that we want in the performance and that we do want at the end of interleaved practice. We don't get that from doing interleaved practice. We get that from doing focused practice with some repetition, right? So we have to be okay with the fact that when you do a run-through of a passage, it might not be very good. And that is not the time to sit and work on it, because as soon as you sit and work on it, we're undoing, or we're canceling the progress that the interleaved practice is actually promoting. And so that one pass becomes, the brain forgets it. It turns into blocked practice. Blocked practice then it translates in a couple ways, but it's not going to translate into keeping things in our fingers. At least it'll take a long time and a lot of practice. Yeah, June, exactly. Don't stop and fix something in that moment. When you get to the end of the run, write down, especially if you need an aid to help remember what didn't go well. Write down what didn't go well. What do you need to practice? Come back to it at another time. And that could be another day where you say, okay, Tuesday of this week, I have time to sit down and I've got 30 minutes to devote to this passage X and Y, right? And maybe passage X is the one that you did interleave practice on. Okay, now I've got 30 minutes and I can do some drilling of certain segments. I can work on tempo. I can work on articulation, phrase. I can practice in groupings, all of those other practice techniques that we might use. But it's at a different day at a different time. Yeah, Faze. Yes. Mm-hmm. Okay. Gosh. I'll share just quickly because some of you know, and I've told some of you, but maybe not everybody who's here, but I am developing a very comprehensive course on practicing. Everything you just heard, well, it'll be presented even more coherently. But that and a whole lot more is going to be in that course. Here's a really cool thing that's a part of kind of the demonstration about how efficient and good practice works. I was practicing last year. Many of you know this because you're on the stream. I was practicing for a recording session in Boston at Mason and Hamlin Pianos. None of that content has come out yet. Some of it's still being worked on. A lot of it is still being worked on. But I recorded a number of performances while I was there. And I had 12 days to prep everything. And the craziest thing is that one of the big pieces that I was working on, I think I did about 6 hours of practice over the span of 12 days on this particular 5-minute piece of music. And I used a variety of practice techniques that some of which we've talked about, many of which we've talked about on the streams before, including the interleave stuff that we just talked about. I went and I did the recording. I came back. I didn't touch the piece again for 4 weeks. And as a test, just for fun, I didn't have anything to prepare it for, but after 4 weeks on the day, I sat down and I recorded, it will come out in the future, but I recorded just on my phone a run through of the piece without touching it once in 4 weeks. And it was still 95% plus there. And ironically, it was all of the technical bits, like the really challenging technical bits, those are all still really good. And it was the slow lyrical stuff that I was like, I don't know if I remember this. But I made my way through, and it was still pretty darn good after 4 weeks of not playing a single note of it. But leading up to that recording session, all kinds of interleaved practice, just jumping from piece to piece to piece to piece, and playing one octave passage from one piece, and then playing something totally different in another piece. Let me highlight that one more time, just for everybody. Interleaved practice is the most efficient and the most beneficial when the passage you're choosing to alternate with or you're choosing to work on interleaved is very different from the other passages that you're playing around it. So if passage X from one piece is very technical, let's say octaves, let's say it's got a lot of octaves, the stuff on either side before and after you've played that should not have anything to do with the technique that you just used to play the passage you're working on. So don't pick another octave passage and practice one octave passage from one piece and then an octave passage from another piece back to back. That will also undo the progress you're making from interleaved practice because the movement, how we're using the body, is too similar. And the body thinks that the two things are related somehow. The mind and the body do. We got to separate them by something totally different, like soft lyrical playing, working on a melodic phrase. All right? Okay. That was a great question, June. I gotta say, I'm definitely not going to get to everybody else's questions today. Let me see. We had a question. Julio, can you bring up your question next time for us about gymnopédie? And we can always talk about what Sam's question was if Sam comes back to the next stream. And, oh gosh, Seth, you had a question about faster scales. And Raja, you have a question about octaves. Okay. Let me see if I can tackle those two, the octave question and a scale question, and then we're going to call it a day today. We'll start with the scales from Seth first and go from there. So Seth's question was, could you explain a bit more how to use the arm for faster scales? You're struggling to transition from slower, more connected scales despite employing rhythms. Seth, do you have a metronome marking or a beats per minute that you're currently working at that you could share with us? Yeah. And if you could also, okay, great, you gave the rhythm. Perfect. So 80 to 116ths. Is, when you give that range, is 80 easy and 100 is difficult, or is that whole range difficult? And how many minutes a day do you practice your scales, Seth? We say, okay, above 100 is impossible. For everybody's reference, this is 100. A scale in sixteenths would be 4 notes per click. Okay, you say 20 minutes plus per day. Okay. Seth, is the problem that it feels like you get tight and tense as you try to increase tempo? Is it the problem that the hands separate? Kind of like that. Is there a problem with over legato where things get really blurry without any pedal? Like... Yeah. So you're saying, yeah, maybe, I think that was about my first question about tension. Seth, have you, it feels heavier, okay. Seth, have you practiced your scales detached? We may have talked about that. I've definitely talked about it on the stream before. But have you practiced? You say, yeah. Seth, could you send in a video of you playing some scales? Because I'd really like to see how you're using the hand and the arm when you play detached scales. And here's why. If we're throwing the finger and the hand into the key and releasing with no, we're releasing back to neutral, right? Immediately upon the key press. Detached scales are they should be extremely comfortable. Some of the problems I see with students playing detached scales incorrectly is too much holding of the wrists up. So I'm always kind of trying to tell my students, we want to throw the hand and the finger into the key. And in order to do that, we have to have some sort of preparatory motion, right? And if you watch closely what I'm doing, there is the tiniest bit, if I slow it down, there is the tiniest bit of lift of the wrist, but it's followed seamlessly by release of the finger down and in. And faster, the preparation almost becomes imperceptible. But it's there because if I don't, I'm left with a very soft note and it feels very uncomfortable to play. But this, super comfortable, super easy. But it doesn't have a big holding of the wrists, which is really bad. And I've had some students come back. We have a great lesson, and they come back a week later and they're going like this. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what did I say to make you do that? Don't do that. Okay? So we're never holding the wrists up, but we do need a preparation. The preparation, there are 3 components, okay? There's a preparation, the release of energy into the key, and then the release of the structure of the hand. I just say the release of the key, because we want to maintain the structure of the hand, but we release the pressure off of the key surface. All 3 of those things should be happening in an instant. And if we're doing that really well, right, every single note strike feels extremely relaxed to play. That's why I love starting students with detached scales, because when we try to play legato scales, we're not allowing the hand to have that very fast and easy release like we do with detached scales. This isn't a fast enough tempo at 100, where our problem is too much movement yet. I could still play detached scales forte in 16ths at 100, right? So if we're talking about speeds faster than that, when you get there, Seth, our type of practice and how we approach detached scales changes. It's also for anybody else, don't try to do that type of motion faster. If you're working on scales at 150, it's not going to happen. But we modify. So Seth, that's the first thing, is in our detached playing, or you might see other people call this also non-legato if you're watching other teachers online. Non-legato playing, not the same as staccato. That movement we want to perfect, and how simple it is. And notice I've been doing a lot of this with the 3rd finger. The 3rd finger is the easiest one to articulate this. So can we get that motion concise, small? Thanks, Bethany. And fluent, so that we can repeat it on 3, and it's very easy, and then we can also add it to any of the other fingers that we need to play the scale with. My hunch, Seth, is that is where our problem lies with increasing speed up to 100 for scales, is that there's an issue with either the articulation of the note at the beginning, that there's a grab, there isn't a release into the key, that there's something else happening that we can aid with detached playing, and there's something else happening on the release maybe, where the release isn't, what's the word I'm looking for? We're still holding or grasping through the release of the key. And it's almost impossible to see the difference between that wasn't a good release and this is. I don't think that it would even look any different. But in one, the first one, everything stayed, the whole hand stayed kind of locked. And if that's how we're releasing, and we're releasing a key with only the arm coming up and the hand isn't releasing, that's going to be a big problem. And it's going to cause issues at this tempo because we're never letting the hand let go. Yeah, well, Jalzora, you saw it. Great. Yes. The first one was definitely, this is the first one. And the second one, all that's left is the structure of the bridge. But because there's no weight through it, it feels exactly like if you let your arm hang by your side and you pick it up, like we've talked about before. Yeah? So if you can do that, and we're talking one note at a time now, that's the release. And it's the same. And everything here is completely free and fluid. So we have to diagnose those two problems. Something in the attack, something in the release that's causing us to hold on too much with a part of the mechanism. And if you get that detached playing working, where we have those three movements, the preparation, the release into the key, and then the release of the key. I had a different word for that I was using in a lesson lately, and I can't remember it. Oh, you could just call it preparation, attack, release. Preparation, attack, release. But you can't say the words fast enough. They happen much faster than that. Okay. Seth, start with that. And please, I know it might feel like, because we work on some music in these sessions, that please send scales in. Gosh, I would love to work on scales with people because there is so much we can work on via scale practice. So absolutely, Seth, if you're having trouble figuring out what I just mentioned can be implemented into your playing, send in a video of some scales, a couple different keys, and I'd be happy to go over it with you. Last question, and then we're going to wrap up, from Raja Piano, and it's about octaves. You say your left-hand octaves are easy. Yes, thanks, Seth. Your left-hand octaves are easy, Raja, but you struggle with right-hand octaves. Raja, first thing, I have a video on 5 tips for better octaves that cover even a beginner or intermediate player could watch the video, but they cover some really advanced techniques. That would be a great reference to look at because I did kind of my top 5 tips for octaves right in one place. And so you could always come back and revisit that. Now, so right-hand octaves. Again, this is probably going to come back to how we've used the hand and the arm to play just a single octave. So, Raja, the first thing we want to be sure of is that when you approach a passage with octaves, or if I use a scale in octaves, that we are not locked. We don't want the hand to be locked. This is kind of it's a shortcut to playing octaves a little faster and a little more cleanly. If you just kind of make the claw and go, right? I'll do, yeah, G is fine. Right, but this is all very tense. It works to a point. The problem with locking the hand is that it also we will tend to lose a good bridge. The bridge will collapse. And then we look like this when we're trying to play octaves with a high wrist. And you'll actually see quite a few people try to play octaves like that. Sometimes they get away with it. That's not really great technique, though. Okay. What we really want, and what we need to work on developing precision with, is being able to move the hand and the fingers from relaxed into the octave position in bursts, like that. so that I know that if I'm relaxed, there's an octave, and there's an octave, and there's an octave. So if I'm playing even just a scale, and I'll show the top-down view of this, but every time I play an octave, I return to relaxed. And relaxed it's not structure-free. Structure-free would be limp arm with nothing happening. We're still maintaining the structure of the hand, but letting the hand return there. Here's from above. You see how every one is a pulse from relaxed out and then back in, and out and back in. The faster you start to do this, the smaller, we don't have as much time to retract all the way, right? So let me give you another example. I've been doing a little bit of practice of this. So these are octaves from the Liszt Sonata. And when I practice this, I'm focusing on the same thing, letting the hand retract. But the degree to which it retracts is maybe not quite all the way here, because in practice, as I play this passage, I don't have that much time. But even if my hand is staying out like this, there's a difference between this feels relaxed, this feels tense. And there's a tiny visual difference. Relaxed, tense. Relaxed, tense. The bridge is high on both, but the tense one is prohibiting me from re-engaging the mechanism. So when we start, we want to learn how to fully let the hand come back together. Like that. Okay. And then, as we go on from that, we can learn how to feel that relaxed position or that sensation without actually ever leaving the octave span, or without maybe leaving it only by a half step or a step. Yeah? I think that's my biggest tip for octaves today. So, Raja, I hope that helps. Okay? Similar as the scale technique, right? Scale with a single note at a time. Always pass through and revisit that point where the hand is fully neutral. Neutral. Neutral is the point from which we start every single note strike. Hopefully. And as things get more and more difficult or more and more technical, we learn how to feel neutral while the hand has to maintain a different shape, possibly. Okay. I think we're going to wrap up today. Yes, absolutely, Raja. And you can use this for your left hand, too. Great. Okay. When is our next stream? Oh, goodness. It's going to be in 2 weeks, March 12th. We will have another stream March 12th. Please, as always, you can feel free to send in a video of your playing, send in some scales, Seth. Click the thumb, as Nancy says. Yes. Thumbs up, not the other one. And I will look forward to seeing you in March again. And yeah, thanks everybody for being here. We've had a great session. So many different things that we've talked about. Wonderful. So yeah, thank you. And stick around the channel, watch some videos. Raj, watch the octave video, the 5 tips for octaves. It's right on the channel homepage. Oh, RD. Well, welcome. Come back next time. I've been on 2 hours and 15 minutes. It's lunchtime for me. So, okay. All right, everybody, practice smarter. and I'll look forward to seeing all of you in the next stream, hopefully seeing you around the channel, and hearing some more music from all of you next time or whenever you're ready to send some in. So I will see you in a couple weeks. All right, everybody, have a great week. Have a great weekend. Have a happy end of February, and see you in March.